The Salt War of 1877 was a conflict over ownership of the salt flats found west of the Guadalupe Mountains at about 90 miles from the city of San Elizario, Texas. The conflict was one of the consequences of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo at the end of the Mexican-American War. The salt flats were important to both sides of the conflict, that is, the politicians and the community of San Elizario, but for different reasons. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo changed the Salt Lakes from Mexican territory to American land, which coupled with the many laws that changed after the treaty. With the new rules, land could be sold and bought, and when a foreign man bought the Salt Lake region, the locals weren't happy. The war caused a lengthy riot and many casualties. In the end, the town was abandoned because of the fear that the government would come and jail the town residents. The salt flats near the Guadalupe Mountains had been important to the community of San Elizario for a very long time. In 1598, when the Salt Lakes were still a part of the New Spain, now Mexico, the King of Spain granted the region of the salt flats to the community. This meant that anyone could freely collect and take the salt. The salt from those flats was essential to life around the region.
That was the livelihood of the community. They would haul salt, which is 90 miles from here, and then they would haul it into Mexico and sell it to the mines in Mexico.
When the salts got to Chihuahua City, it was used in a process to prepare silver ore called patio process. Salt hauling became one of the main businesses in San Elizario, so it brought a lot of money to the locals.
And it was actually more valuable than gold at that time because it was a commodity that was very much in need at that time.
Salt hauling was a difficult business. This is because there were Native American tribes in the area that would attack the salineros, the men who would haul the salts. Additionally, the trail to get to the salt flats was long, and there was no water between San Elizario and the Guadalupe Salt Lakes.
So part of the operation was to bring with them very large barrels of water filled with water, and they would bury them along the way. On the return trip, they would uncover them and they would have water until they made it back.
When the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo got signed on February 2nd, 1848, and the Rio Grande became the new southern border of the United States, all the laws of Mexico no longer applied. Instead, American rules did. Now, people could take ownership of land that was once public.
The community took it for granted since it was a livelihood and they had always hauled salt. They took it for granted and they never got a title for the land.
Locals near the salt flats were not content with this new law because that meant that someone could just come and buy the salt lakes, which were necessary to their everyday life. Eventually, a man bought the Salt Lake region and forced people to pay for the salt. This man was Charles H. Howard, a judge from Austin, Texas. Howard bought the land in the name of George B. Zimpelman, his father-in-law. The salineros were furious when this happened because they didn't want to pay for something that had always been free. In September 1877, two salineros, Jose Maria Juarez and Macedonia Gándara, threatened to take a wagon of salt but got arrested by Sheriff Charles Kerber, who had been warned by Howard about it. On October 1st, 1877, this action caused a mob to capture Howard for 3 days until he gave up his claim to the Salt Lakes and promised to never return to the El Paso County. Charles H. Howard went to Mesilla, New Mexico. However, on October 7th, 1877, Howard returned to El Paso and 3 days later killed Luis Gardiz, a politician that was very popular with the Mexican Americans and who had a long-lasting feud with Howard. Gardiz and Howard were political allies until Howard decided to take ownership of the salt flats. They were allies because Gardiz helped Howard get elected as district attorney. Gardiz's death enraged the Mexican American community in the El Paso County more than they were already. Howard was accused of the murder and put in jail on November 17, 1877. However, he got out on a $4,000 bail that was partially paid by Charles Ellis. On December 1st, 1877, Leon Granillo takes wagons to fill up with salt to the salt lakes to make Charles Howard angry. Howard hears about this. He gathers up some Texas Rangers and John B. Tays, John Atkinson, and John McBride, and goes to San Elizario to press charges. Nevertheless, his plan fails, and a large mob of more than 600 people, led by Francisco Chico Varela, laid siege on Howard and the Rangers. Outraged people from the mob tried to shoot Howard for taking their land and killing Luis Cardis. The mob found former Sheriff Charles Ellis, ties him on a horse, and drags him around town with a slit throat because they found out about him helping Charles Howard. On December 16th, Tays tries to make a negotiation with Chico Varela. Varela offers to let the people live if Howard surrenders his ownership of the Salt Lakes, and Howard gives in, saying, "I will go. It is the only chance to save your lives, but they will kill me." Tays went out of the building that he and the Rangers were staying in for protection to go talk to Chico Varela about their safety. While Tays was out, Atkinson came in and told the Rangers that Tays was outside waiting for them. But when they came out, the insurgents took away their weapons. The Rangers were humiliated and forced to surrender, for they were unarmed. That is said to be the only time Texas Rangers have surrendered. The Rangers escaped, but Charles H. Howard, John Atkinson, and John McBride weren't allowed to leave, although Howard gave up his claims. The people in the mob didn't know what to do, but Father Antonio Borrajo told the people that if they executed the gringos, he would forgive them for their sins. Because of Father Borrajo's remark, the insurgents decided to execute them one by one. They got executed in front of what is now called the Borrego building. They got shot, and the mob attacked them with knives and machetes. One man, Jesus Tejes, swung at Howard but failed and cut off his own toes. In the end, the bodies were chopped into pieces and thrown down a well called El Molino. After the execution, the mob took control of San Elizario. This caused a riot and a lot of looting. Chico Varela tried to stop the mob, but it was too many people. Since there was no army base nearby to stop the riot, for Fort Bliss had been closed down a few years before, the U.S. 9th Cavalry had to come and interfere. When the Buffalo Soldiers from the 9th Cavalry came, everyone ran into Mexico, abandoning the town. The locals that left didn't return because they were afraid that the American government would come for them. After the Salt War of 1877, Fort Bliss was reestablished so that nothing like that conflict would ever happen again. In conclusion, the Salt War of 1877 was a riot that was caused by a man that took ownership of communal land, but he couldn't have done that if it weren't for the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which made the land American territory. People might see this as a whole war, just for salt, but consider that the salt was a big part of people's lives back then. Now the Salt Lakes are a part of the Guadalupe Mountains National Park and can be visited.